5 draft dodges, 1 fake bone spur, and still Donald Trump dares to stand before America, shouting he's a war hero. In just 23 explosive seconds, Jasmine Crockett ripped the mask from his face, exposing the draft dodger who spat on real sacrifice. Over 10,000 furious veterans roared. Congress shook like thunder, and millions watched in rage because if honor itself can be stolen, then what sacred sacrifice in America is safe from his lies? And if Trump has already stolen the glory of true warriors, then what honor is left for America to defend? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The chamber was packed, the kind of silence that doesn't calm but strangles. Cameras swept across rows of veterans in uniform, their medals gleaming under the harsh lights. These were men and women who had lost blood, limbs, and friends' faces carved by war, eyes hollowed by memories no one should carry. Every living room in America was tuned in, waiting for testimony, expecting truth. And then Donald Trump leaned into the microphone. His smirk stretched across the chamber like gasoline waiting for a spark. "I'm also a war hero," he declared, pausing just long enough to let the words drip into every corner of the Capitol. "I ordered the planes. I bombed Iran." The reaction was instantaneous: gasps, sharp inhales, a wave of disbelief that rippled from the gallery to the television sets of millions. A Vietnam vet in the front row tightened his jaw until it quivered. A widow in black clutched the folded flag of her dead husband against her chest. On screens across the country, jaws dropped. This wasn't arrogance anymore, it was theft. Live before the eyes of the nation. Jasmine Crockett's chair screeched as she stood. The sound sliced through the stillness like steel. She didn't hesitate, didn't blink. Her glare locked on Trump, and in her eyes there was no confusion, only fury sharpened into purpose. Viewers could feel it. The storm had arrived. Trump leaned back in his chair, smug, as if expecting applause for the fantasy he had just painted, but the veterans didn't move. Their silence was heavier than booze. It was the silence of men and women insulted, betrayed, spat on by someone who had never worn their boots or carried their weight. The camera zoomed on a Marine in the gallery, his face lined with scars, his legs gone below the knee. A single tear streaked down his cheek, and in that moment America saw it, the chasm between sacrifice and spectacle, between a soldier's pain and a politician's performance. Social media detonated in real time. Hashtag draft dodger, hashtag not a hero, hashtag stolen valor. Crockett's hand slammed on the table. The chamber jumped. "You," she said, her voice low but sharp enough to cut through the broadcast, "dared to call yourself a war hero after 5 draft deferments and 1 fake bone spur." The room froze. Trump's smirk faltered, just for a flicker, but the cameras caught it. Tension boiled. Veterans shifted in their seats, muttering, fists clenched. Millions of Americans leaned closer to their screens. The storm was no longer coming, it was here, and Jasmine Crockett was the lightning. And as the nation held its breath, one question thundered louder than the gavel. Will America accept a man who dodged Vietnam as its self-proclaimed hero of war, or will this be the moment his mask is torn off before the world? The silence after Trump's boast still lingered when Jasmine Crockett rose to her feet. She didn't shout, she didn't waver, her voice was cold, sharp, and merciless. "You dodged the draft 5 times. You never wore the uniform, not for a single day. And yet you dare to call yourself a war hero." The chamber went rigid. A giant screen flickered to life behind her. And there was a timeline stretching across the years, every date glowing like an open wound. 1964. Deferment for college. 1965. Deferment again. 1966. Another. 1967. Another. 1968. The infamous bone spur. The words 5 deferments blazed in blood-red letters across the screen. The cameras panned to Trump's face just as the veterans in the front row shifted, their fists clenching, their jaws locked in fury. The whisper started small, almost too soft for the microphones. "Shame." Then again, louder this time, "Shame." Soon the word spread like fire through the gallery. Veterans, widows, families of the fallen, their voices colliding into a chant that rolled through the chamber like thunder. "Shame, shame, shame." Trump shifted in his chair, his smirk collapsing under the weight of the chant. He reached for the microphone, forcing a laugh that cracked in his throat. "Fake news," he muttered. "I had medical reasons." Everyone knows that. but the screen behind him betrayed him, an X-ray of a healthy heel, pulled from declassified records, flashing next to a headline, "Doctor linked to Fred Trump real estate empire." The chamber erupted in gasps. Jasmine slammed her hand against the table, the sound exploding through the hall. "Medical reasons? No, it was a favor, a doctor's note written to keep you safe while poor Bose died in the jungle. While real heroes came home in coffins draped in flags, you hid behind your father's money and a fake diagnosis." Her words didn't just cut, they bled across the chamber, carving a wound that everyone watching could feel. The camera zoomed tight on a Marine in the gallery, his hands trembling as he clutched the dog tags of his dead brother. A tear slid down his scarred face as he shouted, "My brother died in Nam while you played golf, you coward." The chamber convulsed in chaos, the chant of draft dodger rising now, drowning out Trump's attempts to respond. He tried to bark back, slamming his fist against the table, "I did more for this country than anyone in this room." But his words were lost in the roar, swallowed by the sound of veterans pounding their canes, their voices uniting in defiance. The scene had transformed from a hearing into a trial, and Trump stood guilty in the eyes of the nation. Jasmine leaned forward, her voice steady and unforgiving. "Your mask is slipping, Mr. Trump. The truth is catching up, and America is watching every second." Millions leaned closer to their screens, their hearts pounding, their minds racing with one question that now felt inevitable, almost unbearable. If this is only the first secret revealed, then what darker truths about Donald Trump are still waiting to detonate before the world? Trump slammed his palm on the desk, leaning toward the microphone, as if volume could bury the shame that had just been unleashed. His voice rose, hoarse but defiant. "I ended wars. I brought peace to the Middle East. I kept America safe. Nobody gives me credit. Nobody." The words echoed through the chamber, but they rang hollow, desperate, a man clawing for a legacy he could not hold. Jasmine Crockett tilted her head, a half-smile curling on her lips, not of amusement but of contempt sharpened like a blade. She leaned into her microphone, her voice slow and deliberate, cutting through the noise with surgical precision. "You didn't end wars, Mr. Trump. You ended the truth. You rewrote reality, stole valor, and turned the sacrifices of others into props for your own show." The camera zoomed on her face, fire in her eyes, the kind of defiance that electrified viewers at home. Trump's skin flushed crimson, his jaw twitching as he tried to mask the rage boiling underneath. He bellowed, "I did more for the military than any president in history. Ask anyone, they'll tell you I rebuilt the strongest army the world has ever seen." His words thundered, but his voice cracked on the last syllable, betraying him in front of millions. Jasmine didn't miss the stumble. She struck like lightning. "You rebuilt nothing but lies. You insulted John McCain. I like people who weren't captured," you sneered. "You called fallen soldiers losers, suckers, and now you dare to crown yourself their equal?" Gasps sliced through the chamber. Veterans in the gallery erupted. One shouted, "How dare you?" While another, voice breaking, cry, "My father came home in a coffin while you hid behind fake spurs." The roar swelled into chaos. Trump rose halfway from his seat, finger jabbing the air at Jasmine. "You're a disgrace. You hate America. You're nothing but a loudmouth trying to take me down because you can't beat me." His words spat with venom, but the sight of him shaking, sweat beading on his forehead, only magnified the image of a man losing control. Jasmine remained seated, calm amid the storm, her half-smile now gone, her voice low but unyielding. "No, Mr. Trump, I don't hate America. I'm fighting for the soldiers who bled for it. For the widows who carry folded flags in their arms. For the children who never saw their fathers come home. And I will not let you spit on their graves to paint yourself a hero." The gallery erupted again. Cane strikes against the marble floor, voices chanting "Draft Dodger" over and over until the chamber itself seemed to quake. Trump's face twisted, his lips moving, but his voice drowned in the thunder of fury he could not silence. The camera lingered on Jasmine, unflinching in the chaos, her figure a portrait of defiance and truth. And as millions at home gripped the edges of their seats, one thought pulsed across the nation, louder than the gavel slamming for order. This is only the opening round. How much longer can Donald Trump keep his mask from shattering completely? The chamber had not yet settled when Jasmine Crockett reached under her desk and pulled out a slim, weathered folder. The seal on its cover glared under the lights. Elective Service System, 1968, She held it high for every camera, for every living room in America, and her voice sliced through the chaos. "This is the truth Donald Trump never wanted America to see." The screen behind her lit up, and for the first time, the paper trail of his so-called bone spurs was laid bare. Typed lines, faded ink, a doctor's signature that had kept him from the jungles of Vietnam while tens of thousands of young men his age shipped out in body bags. Gasps rippled across the chamber as Jasmine flipped the folder open. 5 deferments weren't enough. When the war came closest, he needed something stronger. A diagnosis, convenient, bought, a gift not for the son but for the father. The camera cut to Trump, his face, already flushed, drained of color. His lips twitched, his eyes darted from the folder to the screen as if searching for a lifeline. Jasmine pressed forward, her tone unrelenting. Alyssa Bronstein, the daughter of Dr. Larry Bronstein, the man whose pen kept Trump from Vietnam, confessed the truth. Her father never found real bone spurs. What he found was a way to please Fred Trump, a landlord who controlled his office lease. A favor exchanged in ink, traded for influence, and the price, America's honor. The chamber exploded again, shouts, outrage, reporters scrambling to relay the bombshell. One veteran shouted hoarsely from the gallery, "My friend's dying," while he bought his freedom. Another slammed his cane against the marble floor until the sound thundered like a drumbeat of judgment. Trump lurched toward his microphone, voice cracking. "That's a lie. I never." But Jasmine's hand shot up, silencing him before he could finish. "It's not a lie when your own doctor's family admits it. It's not a lie when the evidence is in black and white. And it's not a lie when the graves of Vietnam still scream louder than your excuses." The camera zoomed in on the folder resting on her desk, its edges frayed with time, pages trembling in the air-conditioned draft like ghosts whispering from the past. Every American watching could feel the weight of deceit, the bargain of privilege, the betrayal of every soldier who couldn't buy their way out. Jasmine's voice dropped lower, steadier, pulling every ear closer. "You stole not just an exemption. You stole a place in line. You stole the risk, the fear, the sacrifice that others could not escape. You turned it into your inheritance." The chamber fell into a stunned hush, the kind that comes when truth hits so hard it takes breath away. Millions of eyes locked on their screens, hearts pounding, fury rising. And as the silence stretched, a single question pierced it, sharp and unrelenting. If this truth spreads, who in America will ever again believe in the myth of Donald Trump, the so-called war hero? The folder still lay open on Jasmine's desk, its faded pages glowing like evidence lit by fire. The chamber was silent for a beat, just long enough for the weight of history to settle before a voice cracked the air. But it carried the force of gunfire. "Don't you dare insult our sacrifice," the cameras snapped to him. His hands trembled as he leaned on his cane, eyes glistening with tears that refused to be hidden. The lens zoomed closer until the nation could see every line carved into his face, every scar earned in jungles half a world away. "I carried brothers out of the mud in Vietnam," he roared. "I buried friends who never came home. And you," he jabbed a finger toward Trump, "you bought your freedom with a lie." The chamber erupted in gasps. More veterans rose, one by one, like ghosts summoned back from battle. A man with an empty sleeve pinned neatly to his shoulder lifted his voice, trembling with rage. "My arm is buried overseas because I went where you would not. You are no hero, you are a thief of honor." Another voice rang out, shrill with grief. "My husband came home in a coffin while you played king of bone spurs." The gallery thundered with cane strikes against the marble, the sound like drums of war pounding through Congress. Trump tried to interject, stammering, "I respected the troops. No one loves the military more than I do," but his words were drowned in the roar. The cameras caught him clutching the desk, sweat dripping down his temples, his eyes darting wildly, as if searching for an escape from the storm he had unleashed. Jasmine remained standing, unshaken, her gaze sweeping across the sea of uniforms, widows, and folded flags. She didn't need to speak. The veterans had become her voice. Their fury was the indictment, their grief the verdict. And America was watching, transfixed, as decades of buried pain came crashing into one moment of reckoning. Reporters in the press box scrambled, typing furiously as hashtags detonated online. Hashtag draft dodger, hashtag stolen valor, hashtag no hero. Cable networks replayed the veteran's tear-streaked face in slow motion, the image already searing itself into the nation's memory. This was no longer just politics, this was moral judgment, live and unfiltered. The chanting grew louder, rising like a tidal wave. Draft Dodger. Draft Dodger. It shook the chamber until the very walls seemed to tremble. Trump's lips moved, desperate, but no words could climb above the avalanche of rage. The smirk was gone. The mask was gone. What remained was a man cornered, stripped bare by the people he claimed to honor. And as the fury echoed through every television in America, a single question thundered louder than the chants, sinking deep into the nation's conscience. When a man who ran from war dares to crown himself a hero, can the American people ever forgive, or will his stolen valor haunt this country forever? The roar of Draft Dodger still pounded through the chamber when Trump finally lurched toward his microphone, his voice raw, almost cracking under the weight of the fury surrounding him. "I was sick," he shouted, his hands gripping the table like anchors. "I had bone spurs, real ones. I couldn't serve. I was medically unfit." He tried to steady his voice, but each word trembled like a man pleading his case before a jury that had already reached its verdict. Jasmine Crockett didn't blink. She stepped forward, eyes locked on him, her tone ice cold but sharp enough to pierce through the uproar. "Sick? Then tell us, Mr. Trump, why every trace of your medical file vanished the moment your father's doctor died? Why no follow-up, no surgery, no prescription, no pain documented for 50 years? Where did it all go?" Her words cracked like thunder, and the chamber snapped to attention. Gasps tore through the audience. Reporters scrambled to capture every word. The giant screen behind her flashed headlines from the New York Times. Bone spur records missing. Doctor linked to Fred Trump's properties. Each headline landed like a hammer blow. Veterans in the gallery jeered, their voices swelling into a chorus of disbelief. "Liar," one man shouted, his face red with rage. "Coward," another bellowed. The chant swelled again, but this time it carried a new edge, accusation sharpened into judgment. Trump's face twisted, his eyes wide, sweat glistening under the harsh lights. He pounded the desk with his fist, desperate to regain control. "This is a witch hunt, fake news. They're attacking me because I'm strong, because I fought for America." His voice cracked on the last word, betraying him. The camera zoomed tight, catching the tremor in his jaw, the flicker of panic in his eyes. Jasmine leaned closer to her microphone, her words measured, deliberate, deadly. "You didn't fight for America. America fought in spite of you. Every young man who didn't have your wealth, your privilege, your fake diagnosis, they fought. They bled, they died, and now you stand here and steal their title. You don't deserve their valor, you don't deserve their silence, and you don't deserve their forgiveness." The chamber convulsed. Veterans pounded their canes like war drums. Reporters shouted over each other. The gavel slammed again and again but was powerless against the storm. Trump opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out, just a gasp caught in his throat, the image of a man cornered by the truth he could no longer outrun. The cameras lingered on Jasmine, her face steady, her eyes blazing with conviction, while Trump sat shaking, his shoulders hunched as if the walls themselves were closing in. The nation watched, breathless, as the scene burned across every screen. And in that moment, one chilling question gripped America tighter than the chaos itself. When the lies are stripped bare and the truth hunts him down, how will Donald Trump fight back when there is nowhere left to run? The chamber was already bowling when Jasmine motioned toward the screen. "That it wasn't just Vietnam," she said, her voice tight with steel. "America remembers Pennsylvania." Instantly, the monitors flickered, replaying the footage the nation had tried to forget. July 2024, a rally stage in Butler, Pennsylvania. The camera jolted as a single gunshot cracked through the air. The crowd screamed, Secret Service agents swarmed. And there he was, Donald Trump, clutching his ear as blood traced a thin red line down his cheek. The nation gasped in horror that day, and for weeks afterward, headlines screamed of the assassination attempt. But then came August 7th, Purple Heart Day. The memory cut to another stage, this time draped in flags, veterans seated in the front row, their bodies scarred, their eyes hollow. Trump leaned into the microphone, his bandaged ear still visible, his voice booming. "It wasn't easy for me either. I took a bullet. I know what sacrifice feels like." The chamber in the present shuddered at the replay. Veterans in the gallery erupted in fury, their jaws clenched, eyes wide with disbelief. On the screen, Trump smiled as he compared his scratched ear to the wounds of soldiers who had lost limbs, eyes, brothers in battle. The silence that followed was heavier than thunder, the kind of silence that cut deeper than shouting. A Marine in the audience stood, his sleeve pinned where an arm used to be. His voice trembled, half broken, half roaring. "That scar on your ear is not a Purple Heart. Don't you dare insult the blood we spilled." His words hit harder than any gavel. The chamber erupted with gasps and shouts, the cameras capturing every tear sliding down weathered faces. Trump's eyes darted, his smirk faltering. He tried to interject, voice rising above the chaos. "It was an attempt on my life. I almost died. That's bravery too." But his words collapsed beneath the roar of veterans pounding their canes against the marble floor, a drumbeat of rejection that drowned every syllable. Jasmine leaned forward, her voice low, but every word carried the weight of steel. "A scratch does not equal sacrifice. A bandage is not a battlefield, and your pain, real or imagined, will never match the agony of men who left pieces of themselves on foreign soil." The chamber roared in approval, the veterans' fury fusing with Jasmine's conviction into a storm too powerful to contain. The cameras caught it all, the defiance in Jasmine's stance, the shame creeping into Trump's eyes, the tears of veterans who could not believe what they were hearing. Millions at home leaned in closer, hearts pounding, rage simmering, and as the chants of shame echoed louder than the gavel, one question burned across the nation, undeniable, unshakable: can a shallow wound ever claim the honor that was paid for in blood, in limbs, and in lives lost forever? The chamber still trembled from the fury of veterans when Jasmine Crockett rose again. She leaned into her microphone, her tone razor sharp, each syllable carrying the weight of thunder. "Do not," she said, pausing as every eye in the chamber fixed on her, "do not desecrate the Purple Heart with a scratch on your ear." Her words landed like a hammer blow, cutting through the chaos, silencing even the gavel. The giant monitors behind her replayed Trump's August 7th speech in slow motion, his grin, his boast, his comparison between his wound and the sacrifice of soldiers who bled on foreign soil. The crowd in the present groaned audibly, veterans shaking their heads in disbelief. One widow in the gallery clasped the folded flag in her lap tighter, her lips trembling, as if daring Trump to meet her eyes. He couldn't. Within seconds, phones buzzed across the chamber. CNN's Chiron exploded across screens. Crockett slams Trump. "Don't desecrate Purple Heart." The New York Times blasted an alert. #NotAHERO trends as Crockett confronts Trump live. On social media, the hashtags ignited: #DraftDodger, #StolenValor, #NotAHERO, millions of tweets pouring in as the nation erupted in real time. Trump shifted in his seat, tugging at his tie, his mouth opening as if to speak, but the words withered before they left his lips. The cameras caught his unease, zooming in on his darting eyes, the sweat pooling at his temples. He tried to force a smirk, but the image betrayed him. This was not bravado, this was fear. Jasmine seized the moment. "You compare a scratch to men who came home without legs. You put your name beside soldiers who bled out on battlefields. You spit on their medals, on their families, on their graves. That's not bravery, it's blasphemy against every warrior who ever fought under our flag." Her voice shook with fury, but beneath it burned something steadier, something stronger: conviction. The chamber erupted not just in rage, but in applause, in pounding tables, in voices chanting Jasmine's name. Veterans rose to their feet, some saluting, others crying openly. The image blasted across televisions nationwide was no longer just Jasmine versus Trump, it was truth against fraud, sacrifice against spectacle. Trump tried again, his voice cracking. "I was targeted. I almost died. That makes me." Jasmine cut him down before he could finish. "It makes you lucky to be alive. Heroes don't cheapen the medals of the fallen. Heroes don't steal what they never earned." The word sliced clean through the nose. The chamber froze, reporters scribbling furiously, the hashtag spiking higher, the nation holding its breath. And as the camera locked onto Jasmine, standing tall in the storm, one question burned hotter than all the fury combined. After this strike, will anyone in America still defend Donald Trump's claim to heroism, or has Jasmine Crockett shattered it forever? The chamber shook as if the walls themselves could no longer contain the fury inside. Veterans slammed their fists and canes against the marble tables, their voices crashing together into a single, unyielding roar. "Stop insulting us!" The chant rose like thunder, raw and unrelenting, echoing through every microphone. searing itself into the live broadcast. Millions at home heard the pain of men and women who had carried the weight of war, now directing all of it at the man who had called himself their equal. Trump's face turned ashen, the flush of anger colliding with the pallor of fear. He tried to muster words, lips curling into a growl, but nothing coherent came out. His jaw clenched, his nostrils flared, his hands gripped the desk so tight his knuckles gleamed white under the lights. For the first time, the camera captured not the image of a strong man, but of a man shrinking beneath the weight of his own lies. The chaos intensified. Reporters shouted questions over the roar, snapping photos of every terror-streaked face in the gallery. Every veteran's outstretched finger pointed at Trump like an accusation. "Coward!" Someone screamed. "Fraud!" Another spat. The chamber became a battlefield of words, a storm of rage where every voice carried the authority of sacrifice, and Trump stood powerless against it. Jasmine didn't move. She stood tall amid the storm, her eyes fixed on Trump with a calm that cut sharper than any shout. Her silence was not weakness, it was dominance. The cameras caught it, lingering on her profile as if to capture the moment America realized who truly commanded the room. She didn't need to speak yet. She was letting the fury of the veterans drown him first. Trump slammed his palm against the desk, finally forcing words through his clenched teeth. "Enough. I am your president. I have done more for you than anyone." His voice cracked, the desperation spilling through the cracks of his rage. But the veterans only roared louder, pounding in unison, the chant now deafening. "Draft Dodger! Draft Dodger!" The sound was primal, unstoppable, like a verdict being carved into stone. The speaker's gavel slammed again and again, wood splintering from the force, but it was useless. The chamber had slipped beyond control. The images broadcast across the nation showed not order but uprising of people in rage, a leader cornered, a reckoning unfolding laugh. Trump's face contorted, his eyes darting toward the exits, sweat dripping down his brow. He opened his mouth again, but the sound never came. Every camera zoomed tighter, framing him as a man unraveling under the gaze of those he had mocked, betrayed, and now tried to claim as his shield. And then, Jasmine finally moved. She leaned forward, her hand resting lightly on the folder of evidence, her voice slow but carrying like a blade across the chamber. "You can scream, you can pound this desk, but you cannot escape the truth. Not here, not today." The roar subsided into a tense hush, as if the room itself knew a final blow was coming. Millions leaned in, breathless, waiting. And across America, a single thought crackled in the air like lightning before the strike. If Jasmine hasn't delivered her knockout yet, then when she does will it end Trump's mask once and for all. The chamber was chaos, chants, pounding canes, shouts ricocheting like artillery fire, but suddenly the giant screen above the dais flickered. A red digital clock appeared, ticking down from 0:23. The room froze. The broadcast cameras cut to the countdown, every viewer at home glued to the glowing numbers. It was as if time itself had been set to measure the unraveling of a man. Trump leaned into the microphone, his voice ragged but defiant. "I am a war hero," he repeated, louder, trying to drown out the storm, his fist slamming the desk. "I stood up when others couldn't. I am a hero." The words echoed, desperate and hollow, clashing against the pounding of the countdown. 0:21, 0:20. Jasmine Crockett shot to her feet, her voice slicing through the chamber like steel through silence. "No, you are not a hero. You are a coward, a draft dodger who ran from the war while real men bled in the jungle." The room erupted. Veterans roar, their chants colliding with the digital clock beeping on screen, every second layering tension thicker, tighter, unbearable. Trump's face contorted, crimson under the lights, his jaw twitching as the cameras zoomed in mercilessly. His lips trembled with fury, his eyes darted to the veterans glaring back at him like a wall of judgment he could not break. He tried to speak again, but the chant cut him down. "Draft Dodger! Draft Dodger!" The words hit him harder than bullets, shaking the very walls. 0:17, 0:16. Jasmine's hand slammed the desk, her body leaning forward, her voice cracking like thunder. "Heroes don't hide behind fake spurs. Heroes don't buy their way out of blood. Heroes don't mock the dead and wear their honor like a mask." The cameras caught her face blazing with conviction, every syllable reverberating across the nation. Trump stood, veins bulging in his neck, pointing a trembling finger at Jasmine. "You're lying. You're twisting everything." "I risked my life." He stopped, his voice breaking. The clock blared. 0:11, 0:10. The chamber had become a living heartbeat of rage and revelation. Reporters scrambled, headlines exploding across social media. Crockett calls Trump a coward. Countdown to chaos. Hashtag to 3 seconds trending instantly. Millions at home sat breathless, some cheering, others whispering in disbelief as the numbers dropped lower. Jasmine leaned into her microphone, her tone colder than ice, deadlier than fire. Every second this clock ticks, America sees you for what you are. Not a warrior, not a hero, but a fraud in a suit. The chamber gasped. Trump's face drained, his mouth opening but no words escaping. 0:05, 0:04. The camera panned across the veterans, their fists raised, their voices uniting in a roar that rattled the Capitol dome. Trump shook his head violently, mouthing fake, fake as though denial could rewind time. 0:02, 0:01. The buzzer blared. The room detonated in no shouts, chants, reporters screaming into microphones. And as the screen froze on Trump's hollow, panicked eyes, one thought seared itself into America's conscience. If this is what collapsed in 23 seconds, then how many more buried truths are waiting to shatter Donald Trump before the world? The buzzer still echoed. When it happened, an eruption no script could contain. Entire rows of veterans in uniform stood as one, chairs screeching against marble floors, the sound sharp as bayonets unsheathed. Their voices roared, deep and primal, shaking the rafters. Not a hero. Draft dodger. Not a hero. Draft dodger. The chamber thundered, every chant landing like a gavel on Trump's legacy. The cameras swiveled in chaos. One lens zoomed on a man with silver hair, his hands trembling as he clutched his Purple Heart to his chest, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. Another captured a woman Marine, her fist hammering the table, shouting until her voice cracked. The chant spread like fire, relentless, merciless, draft dodger, draft dodger. It wasn't just accusation anymore, it was a verdict. On the giant screens, hashtags began exploding in real time. Hashtag draft dodger blinked across CNN, MSNBC rolled breaking alerts. Fox News anchors stuttered live as social media feeds burned with fury. Within seconds, phones across America vibrated with the same two words, draft dodger. In homes, diners, airports, living rooms, millions joined the roar, tweeting, posting, adding their voice to the storm. Trump's face twisted, veins straining against his temples. He slammed his palm against the podium, but the microphone screeched with static, his voice swallowed by the chant. I am a hero, he barked again, but the words dissolved under the tidal wave of rejection. The louder he shouted, the louder they became, the chant sensing with the country's pulse. Not a hero, draft dodger. Jasmine Crockett didn't speak, she didn't have to. She stood motionless, her gaze locked on Trump, the fire in her eyes saying everything the chamber screamed. Behind her, reporters scribbled so furiously their pens snapped. One leaned into the live feed whispering, we are witnessing the collapse of a myth in real time. Another muttered, history won't rewind this. The veterans' roar grew so immense it seemed to stretch beyond the chamber, echoing through TV screens and radios, rolling out into the streets of America. People watching in crowded bars stood and joined in, pounding counters, chanting until their throats bled. It was no longer a congressional hearing, it was a public trial, and the jury had reached its breaking point. Trump's shoulders sagged, his mouth twitching soundlessly, his eyes darting like a cornered animal searching for an exit, but there was none. The chant kept hammering, merciless, relentless, the sound of ghosts rising to demand justice for the blood spilled while he hid. Jasmine finally leaned forward, her whisper barely audible, but caught by every microphone. America has spoken. The words pierced through the roar like a final verdict. The cameras froze on Trump's hollow stare, his figure dwarfed by the veterans' towering rage. And across the nation, one chilling question gripped millions of hearts. When the roar of the people becomes this deafening, can even Donald Trump survive the flood that's about to swallow him whole? The gavel slammed down again and again, its wooden crack echoing like gunfire, but the chamber refused to quiet. Order, order, the chair roared, his voice cracking with desperation. Tapers flew from desks, aides scurried like shadows, and cameras caught every frantic second. It was no longer a hearing, it was a battlefield. Fox News cut in live, the anchor's voice almost trembling. Ladies and gentlemen, what you are witnessing is unprecedented. This is chaos in Congress, pure, unrestrained chaos. His words, clipped and breathless, framed the pandemonium as images rolled across America. Veterans pounding their fists, lawmakers shouting over each other, and Trump gripping the podium with both hands like a man about to drown. The roar refused to die. Hashtags multiplied. Hashtag draft dodger. Hashtag not my hero. Hashtag collapse. Scrolling faster than producers could keep up. MSNBC displayed a live split screen. One side Trump's reddened face, the other a sea of furious veterans chanting in unison. CNN called it a moment America will never forget. The world was watching, and every second felt heavier than the last. Trump's allies tried to interject, voices rising above the bedlam. "This is a witch hunt," one shouted, veins bulging at his neck. But his words were lost in the swell of fury, drowned beneath the thunder of voices that refused to be silenced. Jasmine stood motionless in the storm, her silence cutting sharper than any scream. She didn't need to shout, the chaos itself had become her weapon. Camera flashes lit the chamber like lightning strikes, catching every grimace, every bead of sweat, every flicker of fear in Trump's eyes. Commentators whispered comparisons to Watergate, to McCarthy, to hearings that had shaken America before, but none of them dared say out loud what they were all thinking. This moment felt bigger. The chair's gavel pounded until his arm shook, but still the chamber raged on. "Order will be restored," he bellowed, but the words rang hollow. For a heartbeat, the chaos seemed to break the very bones of the building, as though the marble itself trembled beneath the weight of history unfolding live. Trump tried once more, voice ragged, teeth clenched, "I am your hero. I saved America," but the microphones caught nothing but boos. One veteran lifted his Purple Heart into the air and shouted, "You insult us all." The chant reignited, louder, sharper, merciless. Jasmine finally raised her hand, not to silence the storm, but to frame it. Her gaze swept across the chamber, steady and unflinching, before locking on Trump. The cameras caught the fire in her eyes, and for a moment, America leaned in, waiting. It was as if the entire nation knew. This was no longer about one man's lies, it was about the soul of a country tearing itself open on live television. And as the gavel cracked again, failing to cage the fury, one question blazed across screens, headlines, and the minds of millions. Was this the single greatest political turning point of the year, or the moment America itself crossed a line it can never return from? The chamber darkened as the screens lit up with a montage. Trump's words, sharp and cold, reverberated like a gunshot through time. "I like people who weren't captured." The year was 2015, but the insult felt fresh, festering like an old wound ripped open before the eyes of the nation. The camera cut, and suddenly the room was confronted with images that seared the soul. John McCain, shackled in a North Vietnamese prison, ribs protruding under torn clothes, eyes hollow yet defiant. A hero stripped of freedom, but never of honor. The silence in the chamber was suffocating. Even the veterans who moments before had shouted in rage now stood motionless, their fists clenched, jaws trembling. Some lowered their heads, others stared at the floor, as if the very air had been poisoned. For them, McCain's suffering was not history, it was memory. It was brothers left behind in bamboo cages, screams echoing through the jungle, the metallic smell of blood mixing with rusted chains. And now, to hear those sacrifices mocked, to see them reduced to a punchline, it was unbearable. The montage lingered cruelly on the grainy photographs, McCain refusing early release, insisting he would not abandon his fellow prisoners. McCain battered and broken, but never bowing. Against those images, Trump's sneer from a rally podium played again, almost taunting, "I like people who weren't captured." The chamber gasped as though stabbed. It was not politics anymore, it was blasphemy against sacrifice itself. Jasmine's voice finally broke the silence, low but sharp as a blade. "Donald Trump spat on the pain of every American soldier who ever bled for this flag. He mocked the man who endured years in a cage so others could come home." Her words hung heavy, dripping with sorrow, yet trembling with fury. The veterans in the gallery stir, some wiping tears, others slamming their palms against the rail, unable to contain their anguish. Fox's camera zoomed on Trump's face. He was pale now, lips tight, but defiance flickered in his eyes. Yet the damage was done. The clip of his 2015 remark played side by side with McCain's emaciated frame. The juxtaposition so brutal it felt like a dagger thrust into America's conscience. On Twitter, hashtags exploded. Hashtag never forget. Hashtag game see Kane sacrifice. Hashtag not my hero. CNN Nankist whispered laugh, voices strained. This is bigger than a political fight. This is the soul of America, laid bare. The chamber felt less like Congress and more like a courtroom where the jury was 330 million strong. The veterans' chant returned, this time softer but more piercing. Honor, honor, honor. It spread like a hymn, rising above the chaos, filling every corner with a demand too sacred to ignore. And as Trump shifted uncomfortably, gripping the podium like a lifeline, one question pulsed across screens, headlines, and hearts. Can America ever forgive a man who mocked its warriors' wounds, or has he torn open a scar that will never heal? The air inside the chamber seemed to thicken, as though the walls themselves recoiled from what was about to be said. Then Jasmine raised a single sheet of paper and, with her voice cutting like glass, delivered the blow. General John Kelly, the man who served as Donald Trump's own chief of staff, recounts that this man called our fallen soldiers losers and suckers. The words detonated like a bomb, gasps rippled across the chamber, reporters scrambled for their phones, and somewhere in the gallery a veteran choked out a broken cry. The cameras caught his face creased by war, scarred by time, now wet with tears. His shoulders shook as he whispered, "My brothers died out there," and he called them losers. Every screen in America lit with the same images: Normandy graves stretching like endless white rows under a gray sky, flag-draped coffins lowering into the earth, gold star mothers clutching folded triangles of cloth with trembling hands. Against that backdrop, Trump's alleged words losers, suckers echo like a desecration. The chamber erupted. Veterans pounded the benches, their voices rising. Shame, shame. Reporters' microphones struggled to capture the chaos as anchors back in studios stammered. This is beyond precedent. Social media ignited like wildfire. Hashtags surged. Hashtag loser in chief. Hashtag never forget. Hashtag sacrifice not suckers. Trump tried to laugh, to wave it off as fake news, but his voice cracked under the pressure. The defiance in his eyes faltered when a widow in black stood up in the gallery, holding high the dog tags of her fallen husband. Her voice, trembling but unyielding, cut through the roar. "My husband gave his life for this country. And you dare call him a sucker?" The chamber froze. Even the cameras seemed to hold their breath. Jasmine stepped closer, her gaze locked on Trump, her words slicing with surgical precision. "They spilled their blood so you could stand here free. And you dared to mock them from the safety of your golden towers. Tell us, Mr. Trump, what have you ever sacrificed?" The silence that followed was heavier than any shout. Trump's lips moved, but no words came. The veterans stared him down, their eyes like judgment carved in stone. For the first time, it wasn't Jasmine's voice that destroyed him, it was the weight of the nation's dead, pressing down on his every breath. The chamber shook not with chaos, but with something far more dangerous: unity. Democrats, Republicans, independents, veterans, civilians, all joined in one raw fury. The bellow of rage, the sob of grief, the clenched fists pounding wood, it all fused into a single verdict. And as the world watched, the question hung like a noose tightening around Trump's legacy. When a man mocks the fallen, when he sneers at sacrifice, can America still see him as a leader, or is he the only true loser history will never forgive? The chamber trembled with unspoken grief, the air heavy with the weight of every coffin draped in stars and stripes. Jasmine stepped forward, her voice steady yet blazing with a moral fire that pierced through the chaos. She raised her hand, silencing the crowd without needing the gavel. "Heroes," she declared, her tone sharp as steel, "do not call their fallen brothers and sisters losers. Heroes carry their names, their faces, their sacrifice etched into their souls until their last breath." The camera zoomed in, veterans leaned forward, lips trembling, eyes glassy with tears. In the gallery, a Marine, in his 70s, chest adorned with faded ribbons, pressed a hand against his heart. Families clutched photos of their loved ones, and for the first time in the night, silence fell not from fear but from reverence. Trump shifted in his seat, sweat glistening at his temple, his hands fumbling with the edge of the podium. But Jasmine did not give him room to breathe. She locked her eyes on him, her words slow, deliberate, impossible to dodge. "Mr. Trump, a Purple Heart is not a souvenir. It is not a token to be mocked or compared to a scratch on your ear. It is the proof of blood spilled, of bones broken, of lives given so that others might live. When you reduce that sacrifice to mockery, you don't just insult the dead, you desecrate the soul of this nation. The chamber thundered with applause, veterans pounding the wooden benches with fists, reporters scrambling to capture every syllable. Fox News cameras cut to the speaker's chair, where even the presiding officer's jaw tightened in visible disgust. CNN's Chiron screamed, "Crockett, heroes don't call the fallen losers." Trump tried to interrupt, his voice rising in protest, but his words drowned in the echo of a mother's sob. A Gold Star widow lifted her folded flag high, her face streaked with tears, and shouted, "My husband was not a loser." The chamber roared disagreement, a chorus of rage and heartbreak that made Trump shrink into the shadows of his own silence. Jasmine's tone softened, but the softness was sharper than any blade. "We owe them more than medals, we owe them truth, we owe them honor. And tonight, I will not let you stand here, basking in false glory, while the ghosts of our soldiers cry out for dignity." Her voice cracked not with weakness, but with the kind of emotion that shatters walls. The cameras captured it all, the nods of veterans, the clenched jaws of generals, the millions at home leaning forward in their seats. For the first time, Trump had no stage, no rally, no cheering echo chamber. Only silence, only shame. Only the haunting reflection of every name carved into black granite at the Vietnam Wall. And as the chamber held its breath, the question did not belong to politicians anymore, but to the American people themselves. In this defining moment, would Jasmine's moral blow finally shatter the myth of Trump's heroism, or would his empire find a way to rise again from the ashes of dishonor? Trump's hands clutched the podium, knuckles pale under the glare of the cameras. His voice wavered, stripped of its usual bravado. "I ended 6 wars, he stammered, his words colliding with each other, like a man trying to climb a collapsing staircase. The chamber did not erupt, it froze. For a heartbeat, all that could be heard was the nervous shuffle of papers, the faint hum of television lights, and the low rumble of disbelief that swept across the veterans' row. Fact-checkers pounced instantly. Screens behind the press lit up in red banners. No verified evidence, no record of 6 wars ended. CNN flashed archives of troop withdrawals that had stalled, conflicts that simmered long after Trump's claims. The New York Times streamed a fact-check laugh. "Trump exaggerates again." Even Fox anchors hesitated, their voices caught between loyalty and undeniable truth. Jasmine stepped forward, her silhouette sharp against the chamber's marble backdrop. Her gaze pierced through the fog of Trump's words. 6 wars. She repeated, each syllable ringing like a gavel. "Name them. Name the mothers who stopped grieving because of you. Name the coffins you kept closed. You can't, because those wars never ended." The audience stirred, whispers swelling into anger. A veteran in full uniform shook his head, muttering loud enough for cameras to catch. Lies stacked on lies, reporters scribbled furiously, their headlines already writing themselves. For once, Trump had no applause line to save him, no rally chant to drown out the silence. He stood alone, his defense crumbling in real time. He tried again, voice louder but cracks more visible. "The world respected us when I was in office. I brought peace. I stopped chaos." But Jasmine didn't flinch. She leaned closer, her voice steady, calm, but devastating in its clarity. "Respect isn't measured by how loud you shout, Mr. Trump. It's measured by the truth you leave behind. And right now, the truth is staring at you, and it does not bow." The chamber erupted not with applause, but with a wave of incredulous laughter, boos, and shouts of "prove it." Hashtags began firing across millions of screens. Hashtag shaky defense. Hashtag name the wars. Veterans folded their arms, unimpressed. Families of fallen soldiers glared at Trump as if he had spit on their grief. And then, the camera caught what Trump never wanted revealed, his lips tightening, his eyes darting side to side, his chest rising with shallow, panicked breaths. For the first time, the performance slipped, and America saw not the strong man he had always tried to project, but a man cornered, fragile, exposed. The silence that followed was not mercy, it was judgment. Jasmine didn't press further, she didn't need to. The weight of the lie already dragged him down, heavier than any attack she could deliver. And as the clock ticked, the question settled over every living room, every veterans hall, every grieving family tuned in across the nation. After so many false claims, so many broken promises, Would the American people still choose to believe, or had the myth finally shattered beyond repair? The chamber's silence shifted into something heavier, something that even Trump could feel pressing against his shoulders. He turned, searching for support from his own side of the aisle. But instead of the raucous applause he had counted on, the cameras caught a row of Republican lawmakers sitting in stone-faced quiet, their hands folded, their eyes betraying a rare discomfort. For years, they had leapt to his defense, blocking, shouting, spinning his words into something survivable. But tonight nothing. The lens zoomed in, and across America, millions watched the betrayal unfold frame by frame. Senatorial heavyweights who had once pledged fealty stared at the floor, their lips tight, as if silence was safer than lies. One congressman fiddled with his tie, sweat glistening on his temple. Another mouthed something to a colleague, and the word was caught by a lip reader online within seconds. Enough. Jasmine saw it too. She didn't gloat, not yet. Instead, she let the silence of the GOP hang in the air like a noose tightening around Trump's neck. "Why so quiet?" she asked, her voice ringing with deliberate cruelty. "If your leader truly ended 6 wars, why doesn't a single one of you dare stand up and say his name with pride? Or is it because even you know he lies?" The words struck like thunder. The veterans in the gallery slammed their fists on the wooden rails, chanting, "Tell the truth." Reporters leaned forward, capturing every flicker of unease on the Republican benches. Fox's live feed faltered, their commentators scrambling, their usual rhythm broken by the visual of loyalty cracking in real time. Trump shifted uncomfortably. He raised his hand as if to demand order, but no one yielded. His voice quivered with rising anger. "Don't you dare turn your backs on me. I gave this party everything: power, the White House, the judges." But even as he spoke, the camera cut to a senator looking away, his jaw clenched, his eyes glassy with shame. The fracture was small, almost imperceptible, but it was there. For the first time, the GOP looked less like a shield than more like a wall full of cracks, ready to split under the weight of his words. Jasmine leaned into the silence, her tone cutting, precise. "A leader who must beg for loyalty has already lost it. A man who screams for validation is not respected, he is feared, and fear fades." The chamber gasped, a collective intake of breath, as if America itself understood the moment's gravity. Trump's face reddened, his lips twitching, but he couldn't summon the fire he once commanded. The illusion of invincibility was slipping, not shattered all at once, but dissolving grain by grain before the nation's eyes. And as the cameras locked on those uneasy Republican faces, the question pulsed like a drumbeat across every screen, every household, every voter's mind. Was this the moment the spell broke, and would Donald Trump walk out of that chamber still holding the loyalty of the party he once ruled like a king? The chamber, still trembling from the cracks in Trump's armor, fell into a taut silence as Jasmine stepped forward. Her voice, once sharp as a blade, softened not out of weakness, but with the deliberate calm of someone about to carve open the nation's conscience. She didn't shout, she didn't sneer, she let the quiet work for her, every syllable carrying the weight of untold histories. "I want you to remember," she began, her tone low, resonant, almost intimate despite the cameras beaming her words across millions of living rooms, who it was that bled first and bled hardest for this country. It wasn't the millionaires hiding behind doctors' notes. It was the sons of steelworkers, the daughters of janitors, the children of farmhands and seamstresses. Black soldiers, Latino soldiers, immigrants who believed in America even when America had not yet believed in them. The gallery stilled, every breath drawn in sharp, reverent focus. Images flickered across the screen's archival, photos of young men in uniform, their faces dark with grime, their hands clutching rifles they barely knew how to hold. A black G grinning beside a wrecked tank in Vietnam. A Latino private clutching his bleeding arm on a desert floor in Iraq. These were not abstractions. These were lives given, willingly or not, for a flag that sometimes refused to embrace them. Jasmine's voice wavered not with doubt, but with emotion pressing against her chest. Some of them were sent home in boxes draped with stars and stripes, to neighborhoods that had no hospitals, no schools worth the name. Others came home limping, scarred, haunted, only to be told their sacrifice wasn't enough to make them equal. And yet they saluted, they believed, they served again. Trump shifted uneasily, his face caught between annoyance and dread. He knew where this was going, and he had no shield. Jasmine locked eyes with him, her tone steady, almost surgical. "You call yourself a hero for surviving a scrape on your ear. But tell me, Mr. Trump, what medal do you hang on the chest of the mother who worked 3 jobs and still lost her son in Fallujah? What award do you give the young soldier who jumped on a grenade so his brothers might live? What title do you dare claim when those you mocked as losers and suckers carried this nation on their broken backs?" The silence that followed wasn't emptiness, it was charged, humming, raw. Even the Republicans who had avoided her gaze now looked up, caught in the gravity of her words. Some eyes shone with moisture, others turned away, unable to withstand the mirror she was holding up. Jasmine straightened, her voice deepening to a final, resonant strike. "Heroes are not made by boasting on a stage. They are forged in blood, sweat, and sacrifice, often by the very people you dismiss, the very people you will never understand. And so I ask, America." Her words hung in the air, every syllable sharpened to a knife's edge. Who is the true warrior of justice, the man who ran, or the people who never stopped fighting for a country that too often forgot their names? It began with a single clip, a 23-second flash of humiliation replayed in endless loops. By the time the chamber lights dimmed, the internet had already turned into a battlefield. On Twitter, no, X, the hashtags #NotAHero and #DraftDodger surged like twin detonations. Within minutes, they weren't just trending. They were consuming every corner of the platform. Politicians, veterans, college kids, even late-night comedians piled on, retweeting Jasmine's words with captions that cut like blades. One veteran typed, "I bled in Kandahar, he bled at a golf course. Don't you dare compare us." It was shared 2.3 million times in under an hour. Facebook lit up with photos of Purple Heart recipients' faces scarred, bodies in wheelchairs juxtaposed against Trump's smug grin, his tiny bandage taped to an ear. The posts weren't quiet, they screamed with rage, with grief, with a raw sense of betrayal. Families of fallen soldiers uploaded their stories in shaky videos filmed at kitchen tables, mothers holding folded flags, fathers showing medals that would never be worn. Each story drew thousands of comments, each comment another spark in the growing firestorm. On TikTok, the younger generation turned fury into art. Looped clips of Jasmine's voice, "You are no hero, you are a coward who ran," were remixed into booming soundtracks over images of battlefields, gravestones, and Trump's infamous draft deferment letters. Some videos racked up tens of millions of views overnight. Teenagers who had never seen a war firsthand were now stitching together the faces of their grandparents in uniform with captions that read, "This is a hero. That man is not." The storm wasn't random, it was orchestrated by outrage itself, each share amplifying the shame, each comment driving the blade deeper. For the first time in years, the digital tide didn't just mock Trump. It drowned him. Every platform became a tribunal, every post a verdict. In Washington, advisors huddled, whispering that online noise doesn't win wars. But this wasn't just noise. This was the sound of millions who had decided that silence was no longer an option. The question pulsed across every feed, across every glowing screen in America. When hashtags carry the weight of grief and fury, do they remain pixels or do they become power? The chamber had been a battlefield of words, but now it fell into a silence so thick it felt sacred. From the gallery, an elderly veteran, in a crisp uniform, rose slowly, the weight of his medals clinking like echoes of past wars. His voice carried across the hall, steady but trembling with conviction. "Ang tak hang fien hung, Jasmine Ngi la ting no cia chung ti." The sentence cut through the nose like a bugle call at dawn. Others followed, men and women in faded jackets, wheelchairs, prosthetic limbs gleaming under the lights. They stood one by one, not with rage this time, but with a solemn dignity forged in trenches and deserts. Their words were not shouted, but spoken with the gravity of oaths. A Marine who had lost both legs in Fallujah lifted himself by the strength of his arms and declared, "Dandu kang thuk via k trun tran, na thuk via nun gi dan gi dine vih that, vanun gi dam mo ss that." Jasmine's eyes glistened as she turned toward them, her jaw clenched, her silence more powerful than any speech. Cameras zoomed in on the tears streaking across scarred cheeks, on the trembling salutes offered to her, not to the man standing at the podium. The nation was watching veterans reclaim their narrative, refusing to let history be rewritten with vanity and lies. On every screen, America witnessed an unshakable truth. Service was not measured in applause lines or campaign rallies, but in blood, sacrifice, and the courage to call cowardice by its name. Trump's lips moved as if to respond, but no sound came. For the first time, his bluster collapsed under the crushing weight of those who had given everything. It was not a partisan moment. It was not politics. It was the raw declaration of a brotherhood and sisterhood that transcended parties, demanding that honor be protected, that the fallen not be mocked, that truth stand taller than ego. As the veterans' voices merged into a solemn chorus, the air in the chamber trembled with the force of something greater than anger. It was legacy. It was memory. It was justice itself standing trial. And the question that thundered beyond the walls, echoed in every living room, lingered sharp as a blade. When the guardians of sacrifice speak their final word, who will dare claim the right to defend America's honor? The chamber was no longer chaos. It was silent, trembling, as if the walls themselves leaned in to listen. Jasmine Crockett rose to her full height, her hands gripping the podium with the steadiness of someone carrying not just her own voice, but the weight of a nation's memory. The camera zoomed in, every living room in America suddenly inches away from her burning eyes. She inhaled, and when she spoke, her words struck like lightning. Den du kang na amuaben quan luck, nacha ko ggcben ss that vahai sin. Chun ta kang cnn and hungai, chun ta cnn kang ls that. Her voice didn't waver. It thundered, echoing across the chamber, reverberating through the airwaves, piercing the millions watching at home. Behind her, veterans stood motionless, their salutes frozen mid-air, their faces streaked with tears. The image was unforgettable, a congresswoman framed by those who had given their bodies and their youth for freedom, declaring to the world that truth could not be buried beneath money, propaganda, or fear. Reporters scribbled furiously, anchors whispered into microphones, and social media erupted in real time. But Jasmine didn't break eye contact with the camera. She was speaking past the chamber, past the politicians who squirmed in their seats. She was speaking directly to the people. Her voice hardened as she leaned forward, as if daring the lens to blink. America's true heroes are those who serve, not those who hide. The words landed like a verdict. Not a campaign slogan, not a soundbite, a sentence carved into history, as irreversible as the names etched on memorial walls. The crowd in the gallery erupted in applause, but Jasmine did not smile. This was not triumph, this was testimony. For a split second, the camera caught Trump's face, ashen, small, his jaw clenched but powerless. The contrast was brutal. One man crumbling under the weight of exposed cowardice, and one woman standing taller than the chamber itself, her voice braided with the cries of generations who had sacrificed in silence. And as the broadcast drew to a close, her gaze never broke. It was a challenge, a demand, a call to action. Who do you believe the true heroes are? Comment below, and let America decide. In the end, Jasmine's stand reminds us that honor is not found in titles or power, but in the courage to speak the truth when it costs the most. The veterans in that chamber did not fight for applause, they fought for the simple dignity of justice. And Jasmine's words prove that one voice, when fueled by integrity, can shake an entire nation. In our own lives, we are asked the same question. Will we stay silent when injustice rises, or will we stand and speak? What moment in your life demands courage today? Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.